Hi, this is Trevor Garland, and this is the final presentation for research methods in summer 2018 for Professor Honorbahn. So I started this semester looking at a case study from Dale Clifford, who worked through binary on something called seed pod homes, and he basically looked into the efficiency in terms of the siting and environmental context to the seed pod home, and partnered with Carnegie Mellon University to explore how the practice of biomimicry basically can serve as a precedent for green building and sustainable architecture. And he talked about in his process the ideas of equity, ownership, and affordability, which will translate to my personal project that stemmed from this precedent study. In his process, Dale Clifford used a cactus to basically dissect the organism to program and basically learn how plants and other biological beings function and operate, and then apply that to the context of humans. And that was seen in the outcome of the seed pod home, which is shown on the right. And some other precedents that just show the layering and the process of analyzing the outcomes of green building and sustainable practices that can be applied to lower income families as well, as seen in the diagram on the right there. The layers of a green roof exploding, just so you can understand. Part of his process was looking and studying the ins and outs of how all of the complexity can package into something as small as a seed pod home for an everyday user to experience. Another part of his process was making it applicable to people who don't necessarily have the paycheck or the affordability that most might. So lower income families would be heavily considered in the process of imposing green building practices and technology to those people who aren't as financially apt to support these once known processes to really only higher classes or higher income families. And so his methods in the case study would be researching the climate and the environment of the place. He picked Tucson, Arizona because of the harsh circumstances seen there in terms of its arid, hot, arid climate. And so by picking one of the worst case scenarios, that sets it up to be applicable to any circumstances as harsh or less harsh as Tucson, Arizona. And then the second portion of his process looked into logistics and programming. And he specifically analyzed the material comparison between cost of masonry or wood, and then he even precedented what a lot of us could attribute to Frank Lloyd Wright of using local materials, not just for the aesthetic purpose, but also for logistical purposes and making it cheaper than delivering something from overseas or across the country or wherever it might be. And then in deeper analysis, some of the outcomes that Dale Clifford found in his study were responding to the market analysis that called for $25 trillion in a building boom in the next 2 decades. And so his response to this was attacking the portion of it that specifically might have been overlooked in the past about the lower incomes not receiving the same amount of attention that middle and higher incomes could in terms of what they can afford in terms of green building and sustainable housing. And so in my personal application for this case study methodology, I applied the research of place and siting like Dale Clifford did, but I also sort of incorporated the cultural aspect of using Detroit as the site to ensure representation of all social classes in the development of sustainable housing for lower income families. One of the case studies that I referenced that started to, but didn't quite complete the in-depth analysis that I'm hoping to continue, was the Motown movement, and they basically their goal is to take all the practices and teachings of sustainable housing and green building, similar to Dale Clifford, and then apply them to lower income families. But what my analysis of their process understood them to leave out was studying the place and the cultural history of Detroit as a city, because they ran into some issues with arson and other things like that set back the project that might have been avoided had they researched the place and the historical significance of what they were doing there. And so looking at 3 separate elements, we'll start with program. Dale Clifford used program. Basically, he rooted his in adopting biomorphism and biomimicry in architecture, to basically form a space and program it through how that function can be attributed from what he studied as the source, which was what I referenced earlier in him talking about a cactus and the dichotomy of that. And the second element would be site. And so site in Dale Clifford's project was Arizona, very hot and arid. Detroit has a pretty similar application of this in that it just has 4 seasons, which is different, but it has the same level of rigor which needs to be addressed in terms of what materials and then building systems are selected to best fit the environment for preparing for, I guess, the most severe of all those seasons. And then last but not least, economy, which is a major element in Dale Clifford's project and is just as major in Detroit developing for lower income housing, is considering how this can be sustainable in pretty much the project paying for itself. So where he analyzed material costs compared to one another and found it could be 30 to 40% cheaper if you used masonry instead of wood to that specific area. In Detroit, for my personal project, the application of this could be using the infrastructure and the materials that already exist, because the city was built for 2 million people and currently only has a population of just around 700,000. So there are about 1.3 million homes that are either on vacant lots that used to be homes, or they are in disrepair, and the materials there could be used and recycled or upcycled to incorporate into the people who are moving back to the city or are just currently living in the city. And so that removes the need to manufacture new materials or import materials from somewhere else. And so logistically, that's also a more economical solution to that. And so one precedent project that we looked at too, the Clean Air Nairobi project, talked about how to gather reliable data and use information that's found in large masses of people. And I found the outcome of that and its pertinence to my project was that it took large numbers of people, and just by involving entire cities in the data set and making it very easy and simple to gather the information, they're able to get a more accurate understanding of what exactly the problem is and how many people are experiencing that problem. And so you can see economy was one component of it in the Nairobi example, and then the scale and involvement, which I think is also very pertinent to the Detroit project of adopting these practices and methods and outcomes to Detroit for more sustainable housing for lower income families. And for program in the Detroit project, I also referenced Pruitt-Igoe as an example that basically didn't go far enough in depth in terms of incorporating community space and the landscape and the environment that people who are living in a city need as another component of their quality of life, which was omitted. And then, as many people know, Pruitt-Igoe was a failure because of this and fell into disrepair and was pretty much a disaster. And so what I see as an integral component to Detroit housing for lower income families remaining sustainable would be incorporating the community space as an integral factor to this development. And then, as we talked about before, the site being a different set of conditions, but still the same process through which Dale Clifford and his team with Binary considered as a tactic to basically appropriately select the materials and consider the environment around the site of Detroit, which is, like I said, different, but as long as you understand the seasons and the most severe conditions you'll likely encounter, you can prepare for this, and it'll be easier for lower income families to prepare for it if they know about it earlier, rather than having to perpetuate a non-affordable situation for them. And then the economy would kind of segues from the site example, but it is economical to recycle, and then you don't have to buy and produce new materials. You could just repurpose the materials that are already there in the city. And so the quantity of residential spolia that's available to tenants and occupants can be implemented to them building and or maintaining the houses that they either are about to own or already own. And that concludes the final presentation for Research Methods Summer 2018.